All right. We are back with another episode, and to say that I am excited is an understatement. I'm also incredibly nervous. We have two titans of the industry of coaching on this podcast, and you couldn't ask for two better guests. So, Elizabeth, Marni, Elizabeth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Is Titans like an appropriate word? I didn't know how to like really intro that.
I'm a little uncomfortable with it. Yeah. I'm thinking of like football coach, Division I. I'm not quite sure we're there, but you know.
Have you ever yelled at an athlete like that?
No, I haven't.
It depends. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay. It's not the best way to motivate an athlete is to scream at them, but
tough love.
Yeah, it depends, Stephen. Like most things in coaching, it depends.
Good. We're starting this thing off well. So who wants to go first? So I would just like to go through a little bit of introduction so the speaker or so the listeners know who they're listening to. Who wants to go first? Any preference?
I can go ahead then. I am Marni Sumbal, and I live in Greenville, South Carolina. And I have been coaching for about 15 years now. My background is with a Master of Science in Exercise Physiology. And I am also a registered dietitian and board certified in sports nutrition. I've completed 18 Ironman races, most recently the Ironman St. George, which was my best performance to date, which I was 5th in my age group in St. George, in my new age group, 40 to 44. And I've completed a handful of half Ironmans, gravel races, recently mountain bike races. So I'm really enjoying this triathlon lifestyle, but I really enjoy coaching and helping athletes with their nutrition to help them excel in the sport.
And where are you from?
Greenville, South Carolina.
Greenville, South Carolina. Cool. Elizabeth, you're up.
Yes, Elizabeth Waterstraat. I live in the Chicago area. I have 3 kids, ages 5, 7, and 11. I have a very sporty husband as well. I have an amazing lawn. I've been coaching since 2007. I come from a background in education and social work. And I would say 20 some odd years ago, I started to dabble in endurance sports and at some point decided to blend my two passions, being sports and education. So here I am. I coach athletes of all levels, all over the world, whether someone is just telling me they want to go couch to Ironman or they want to stand on top of the podium at the next World Championship. I enjoy the challenge of all of it, and it's what I do full time these days.
And you're also, I mean, I'm not to brag, Elizabeth, but you're also a newly gravel triathlon national champion.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It possibly might be my most costly national championship because I ended up with a new bionic thumb right here. It turns out I don't feel pain like a normal human does. And didn't realize that I tore a ligament in my thumb. I also didn't realize thumbs were so important. Like you need your thumb for a lot of things, and you can't just walk it off or ice it or buddy tape it. So I had some surgery yesterday, but you know what? There's worse things than this. Although in the middle of summer, this is pretty bad. But this too shall pass.
Well, good for you for fighting through that. And you look great. I'm not sure if you're still on some painkillers and that's why you're giggling or just the excitement of it.
You know what?
You look great.
No, I'm laughing because Steve is laughing right now because I know exactly what he's thinking. But yeah, no, yesterday I took a fentanyl nap for like 90 minutes while they worked on it. I did have some pain meds, but I don't know if you guys have ever had surgery. I'm really not a big fan of the pain meds. I think they cause more problems than they're worth. So today I'm just toughing it out, and I'll be honest, it doesn't really hurt that bad. So
yeah.
Well, I have to share what I'm thinking because I'm thinking a couple of things. So the first thing is if you're going to win, it's going to be whatever it takes mentality. Let's get the seriousness one out of the way. Second one, how do I phrase this? In your intro, Elizabeth, you said that you were very proud of your lawn, and this is really going to set the lawn back. I mean,
No.
Oh no, it won't.
No, Steve, a professional hires people to take care of their lawn and make it look amazing. Just like you hire a coach to bring out your best and have your best performance. I don't mess with fertilizing my lawn. There's a company that does that.
And thirdly, you just brought that club out for the first time since we've been recording and non-recording. So all of a sudden that thing came out. But okay, and so Marty, on an athletic side, you've been to Kona, like you're also a very high level athlete, and then at St. George, you were just fifth at that crazy race. I mean, do you want to highlight anything athletically also that you've done?
This was my sixth Ironman World Championships. I've turned down a few slots to Kona along the way. So I've raced in Kona 5 times, and this was number 6. And actually, I had no desire over the last few years to get back to Kona, but the St. George course really excited me. And then I also felt like it really suited me as an athlete. And so I was going there with an adventure mindset and just wanting to experience the course and do the Ironman there in St. George. And it ended up being a great day. And I think sometimes, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it today, is really being able to pivot and look for different opportunities and different courses that suit your strengths, and making sure that you pick races that get you excited. A lot of the races that I've excelled at the Ironman distance or the half Ironman distance have been very challenging courses. And I really like that, because then I can go there without trying to be fast, but being a smart athlete, a skilled athlete, and using specific strategies to get the best out of me on the day.
Yeah, I wish I was turning down Kona spots. I wish I was kind of at that. No, and so I'm curious about St. George just personally, because I think that race was incredibly interesting and new. So what did you find to be the most difficult part of that course?
Well, I just want to go back to your previous comment, and I've said this in some of my previous blogs, that I actually won my age group in the 18-24 age group in 2006 when I did my first Ironman. And I didn't win my age group again until 2019. And so I think 2019 or 2018, no, 2017, I'm sorry. So it was almost 10 years later that I won my age group. So it was not an overnight success. And I always think it's really important to remind athletes of that even when you see somebody excelling in their athletic career, that you have to go back and see what they had to overcome and all the hurdles along the way. So an overnight 10-year journey. But as far as St. George, the hardest part of that course, well, first of all, I got my period 2 days before the race, and that just felt miserable the day before. So that was really a tough experience, to have to expect so much out of your body when you're just not feeling like you can perform at your best. So that made it very challenging. But as far as the course itself, I think actually I liked the course. It was definitely challenging. But I think what was so hard about it was that it was the first big race of the year. I didn't have any prior racing experience. And once you race, you become a better racer, and things become more familiar. Your body knows how to suffer a little bit more. The mind knows what to expect. And I think that was really hard, in that I really battled with how far can I dig? I wasn't really willing and ready to dig deep yet and be really uncomfortable. And then I also didn't trust my body either, because I hadn't raced since the St. George Worlds back in September. So I think just being the first race of the year and being so early and a world championship course made it really challenging. Yeah.
And Elizabeth, have you ever been to an Ironman World Championship before?
I've been to a few. Yeah.
I always love asking that question, knowing the response I get from it.
No, yes, I don't speak of it much, because I think it's the least interesting part about me is I've done a lot of races. I've been to Kona. I've won national championships. It's all great, But like Marni said, it's never an overnight success. There's a long history, lots of obstacles and bumps along the way. But yes, I've been to Kona, I don't know, four or five times, I think.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly say, I know when Marni was saying that, so when I first did my first Ironman in Wisconsin, oh boy, it was back 2010. It was 2010 I did my first one in Wisconsin, and I did qualify at Kona. And I was really young. I was maybe my 5th year into the sport, and I turned it down. And I thought, I'm going to have a lot of opportunities to get that back. And I've yet to requalify back. And I don't know if I kick myself for it, but like you said, it's not always like a very linear progression up to that point. So one thing I want to ask you, and we'll start with Marni on this, is so currently, as a coach, I mean, you're always, typically you're waking up, you're thinking, you're reading. I mean, what are you currently reading, or what are you currently thinking about or trying to implement with some athletes that's fresh on your brain, research or something that you're reading?
Great question. And I'm so happy we're starting off with this. I think that we are in a really exciting time for our sport right now, endurance triathlon, especially we're back to normal racing again after the pandemic. Ironman has been doing a fantastic job showcasing the races on Outside TV and on Facebook, so we get to watch the races. We've got so much with the sub 7, sub 8, with Super League, with all these different events, with PTO. Triathlon is around us, and for us triathlon fans, me included as a coach and as an athlete, it's just so exciting that I can look forward to the weekend, and I know I get to watch a triathlon event or after I just did the Blue Ridge 70.3, I could not wait to get home or back to our Airbnb to watch the sub 7, sub 8. It was I just want to get back and I just want to watch it and be glued to the TV. But with this, although the performances are great, what I'm really seeing is the value of mental and physical health. And we've seen this from a few athletes, specifically Daniela Reef, who took time away from the sport to, what I would say is to work on her mental health, to try to find herself again. Kat Matthews, who is such a strong advocate for body positivity. Christian Blumenfeld, who him and his team have such a heavy scientific approach, but yet they haven't tried to change his body composition, which I really appreciate. So I think what we're really seeing now is that when you're healthy in mind and body, you can train consistently well, you can enjoy the sport, you recover quickly, and you perform well. We are seeing that the leaner bodies tend to be more fragile, even if they are performing on a really high level. So we celebrate that accomplishment, but can they repeat it? And what else makes them such a great athlete? And some of these athletes, like I just mentioned, and there's many more, just seeing less risk for injury and burnout and sickness and setbacks. So I'm really loving where we are in the sport right now, because I think it's taking a healthy turn and becoming very inspiring, and I'm just so fired up.
Yeah, I think on that, and it's the conversation also appears to be really healthy, because I think the people at the top of the sport are just different than what we've typically have seen. And I think that conversation really appears to be, like I said, in a very healthy sense. And I agree.
Yeah, it all trickles down. That's such a good point, right? It comes, from the coaches advocating the right things and encouraging the right things for their athletes to make sure that they're healthy, but then also even higher up with companies and marketing and social media and commentators, making sure that they pass along the right language and advice for the athletes as well. Yeah.
And Elizabeth, what about you?
As far as what I'm reading or checking out these days,
yeah,
I'm a big reader, big consumer of books and articles. And Steve, I shared it with you not too long ago. A great book that I read called The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. And there's a wonderful chapter in there about interoception. And interoception is basically your understanding of what you're feeling on the inside. And this is something I've really focused on with my athletes this year as a coach. I've done this sport since 1998, and it has changed. Back in the day, you had a Timex watch, and if you were lucky, it could save 30 splits that you pressed. And you just trusted that the courses were measured right. And you just went out there and you did the best you had based on RPE, or if you were really lucky, heart rate. There's so many gadgets these days, and you could geek out on everything from your sleep, to heart rate and power for running and this and that. And I find that athletes can get really lost in the details so much that when they're out there on race day, they can't even function, And so I've really kind of helped or asked them to turn inward and, how does this feel? And I'm sure I get really annoying because I keep asking them, but how did you feel? What made this happen? So as you were out there pacing it smart, what were you thinking about? And just getting them to look beyond the numbers, because while I think that all of these numbers are wonderful and I use data just as much as any other coach, I also think that it can take some of the joy and the freedom and the flow out of the process, which is where I think the best performances come from.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you said right at the end there was like flow, and I think that's like the one part of where where people when they use too much data and they're relying too much on data, sometimes if you're using it too much, it can be more hurdles, right? Where people like are searching for sometimes confidence in like other areas. And they say, well, what's my whoop score? Oh, crap, not that great. Okay, well, you just reduce flow. But you wake up and you feel good, but like you've hit your first hurdle, and that kind of influences the rest of the day, because we know how strong a placebo effect can be on athletes. And that one thing could just mess the whole rest of the day up because of one informational piece that they saw. And I mean, and how has that gone with asking those questions? And I mean, have you noticed anything yet with athletes by really being diligent with asking them questions? More questions?
Yeah, I think, at first people are resistant and they always want, like you said, they're always looking for those clues and that proof of, am I getting fitter? Am I faster? And we all know that, like you said earlier in this podcast, that, progress is not always linear. You don't get faster every week. And that's not even the clue or the proof that we're looking for to see that the training plan is working. It could be that your perception of effort is down, or, we're looking at the bigger patterns over time. So I get a little bit of resistance, and especially because of, the online program we use, it's so heavy into the numbers, and people want to know, what do all these numbers mean? And I always tell them, okay, well, here's what this means. However, what we're looking for are trends over time. How are you feeling? The races are the final proof of how we're doing. So, it's hard because there's a lot of information out there, the latest gadget. And so getting people to just use something so prehistoric as just how you're feeling can be a little uncomfortable. But it's freeing though. Once people really buy into it, they get out there and they're enjoying themselves more on race day, because I feel like they're more in the moment on race day versus just obsessing about what's my speed, what's my power.
Yeah. And I think of the word investment, where I think some people have this misconception that if you're not invested in the sport, if you don't have all of these things, and then they say, yep, okay, I got this, I have that, I'm really invested into it. But then all of a sudden the stress level increases. And I'm just going to speak like on myself generally, like when I'm like training the best and when I'm in the best mental space is when I'm almost training at like my most minimalist, where I'm not like actually reviewing my data. I just know that it went well. I'm not actually looking at any Strava stuff. I'm not looking at anything. I'm just doing me, and that's it. And it's like the best places that I can be in when that's kind of going well. And I think this segues into one of the main topics that we wanted to talk about is longevity. And all three of us have been in the sport for quite a long time. We've been coaching for quite a long time. And I mean, I'm sure the collective of the number of athletes we coached is quite large. And I think the biggest topic is longevity in triathlon as an athlete. So like, let's kind of get into that conversation, because I'm sure we've seen athletes come in a year, they want to do an Ironman, they've never done anything before, and then the next year they're gone, which I think as a coach is like really painful to see athletes kind of go through a very short life, because we know how special the sport can be. So I'm curious. I mean, Elizabeth, we'll start with you. Is like longevity in triathlon. I mean, yeah, let's take it away. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's really important to start from a place where you have that long range view and understand that progress and goal achievement, it takes a long time. And, that requires patience. And I find when an athlete can just look far down to where they want to go and stay patient, then they enjoy the process a little bit more. So patience is a big part of it. I think another thing is understanding that every year, every day, you're someone different. Like today, I'm not the same person I was last year or the year before. And so understanding that you need to evolve as you grow in the sport. You can't always be doing the same thing. You take on an athlete and they're like, well, I've always done this selection of racers, or I've always done the group ride on Tuesday nights. And, our bodies respond to change. And so I think it's good to always be changing things up and not falling into the same habits and patterns, and always be looking for that new response. What do you think, Marni?
Those are all really good advice, and I buy into all of that. I mean, nothing's going to replace hard work, and you and I are both really competitive athletes. So I don't think that you can be competitive without putting in the time and the hard work. But many athletes tend to take that to the extreme, or believe that there's only one path to athletic excellence. And again, it doesn't, like you said earlier, it doesn't matter if you're trying to win your age group or just finish a race for the first time. You still want to get the best out of yourself. And that's what sport in training, that's why we don't exercise, we train. So we can change our physiology and prepare ourselves for the demands of racing. As far as myself, I haven't been doing it quite as long as Elizabeth, but I think it's just so great to see what she has done since the late 90s. And then I started the sport in the 18 to 24 age group. I was 23 when I did my first half Ironman. So that was in 2006. And I've raced every year since, and I haven't taken any breaks over the year. But I've also done a lot with my life. I have a new degree as a registered dietitian. I've moved. I started a business. I've expanded my furry family. So we've done a lot over the years. And I don't take long breaks between seasons. And I think that's one thing that a lot of athletes do, is they take too long off, and it gets really hard to get back into the sport again. And then sometimes steps are rushed because they feel like they're on a timeline that they have to rush back in. It always makes me really sad when an athlete says that, yeah, I haven't swam in 6 months. And that just, you should do it because there's other benefits to that. And I think that's important. You're not just training for an event, you're training for life. So you can be healthy for life. And swimming, biking, running, they're all really good sports. Maybe I'll take 2 weeks off, like where I'm just kind of checking out or just doing some different activities. But that's not to say that I'm training hard all year long. My training is never monotonous. And I think that's something for athletes to look within themselves or to talk with their coaches to make sure that they're not just doing the same type of training year after year or even month after month. I mean, it's great to have some repeated sessions, and there's definitely some stuff that we give our athletes year after year because it's proven that it works, or we just know that they're going to get something out of it. But changing your training and keeping it fresh and exciting and different is so good, not just for the body, but also for the mind. Also, I love being outside. I live in an area, although it gets cold in the winter, that we can train outside. And I love riding my bike. I love riding all bikes. And I also really enjoy biking with other people and doing group rides, especially in the winter. And so these are things that are really important to me that help me stay in the sport. And so I make the decision as to there are workouts that may not be so fun that I need to do indoors, but I need to balance that with workouts or activities that feed my soul, that make me happy. And finding that balance is really important. And then the last thing, and Elizabeth did a really good job talking about this, is that I do not put pressure or expectations on myself with with metrics. I don't use them when I race, and I don't use them when I train. That's not to say that I don't have them, because they do record the data. But when I'm training and when I'm racing, I go by feel. And I go into each session, especially since I have a high risk for injuries with running. I have to be extremely careful when I run. And I take that same, whereas with biking and swimming, I can take more risks. I feel like I can push. Those sports are much safer to me in pushing. But regardless, I just stay in the moment and I just assess, how am I feeling today? What's the purpose of the workout? Focus on today. The past didn't happen. Tomorrow may not happen. Just give my best and have fun today. And then the last thing I just have to say is good nutrition and good sleep. I fuel for every workout. I don't do any fasted sessions. I use sports nutrition for all my workouts all year long. So I really believe that keeping my body healthy is important, just as important as keep the mind healthy.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about with that, and I think it's interesting just to note that two high-level athletes here, both basically saying that when they're racing, there's not a lot of data being used when they're racing, which I think is very important to just point out there. One thing I was thinking about is Elizabeth had mentioned something about routine. We've all had these athletes who say, this is the races that I've done. This is what I do. And I think it's interesting because at some point that schedule or those races or that training style got them to be where they are. And that's super fantastic. But then I always think about it too, in terms of longevity, is changing the stress up. And I think when I talk to people who are in that level of a routine, I say, okay, well, I want you to do races that are totally different this year. And they're like, what? Which is a totally different stress. It's incredibly different. But I think we're talking about stress also in a positive standpoint. We have to stress people to do different races and to do different types of training. And that might be really hard for them. But one thing I think about for people who refuse to change that level of thinking of these races, they're the ones that just get bored really, really quickly. And they're like, yeah, but that's what I do. I'm like, yeah, but are you not seeing the fact that this mindset is actually making you really bored and you're not training as hard as what you used to, because it's almost predictable. I think at some point we need a little bit of unpredictability to kind of get that level of stress, to have a really good arousal level, with training and racing and going to a new place and a new course and all of that stuff that makes you better.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I'll just mention something real quick, is that, as a coach, one of my jobs is to help athletes be uncomfortable, not just as an athlete, but to be tougher for life as well. And that's what is important to me, is to prepare them in many ways. And we have to keep in mind as athletes that sometimes choosing the safe option or just trying to focus on getting faster or have a proven result or to have a PR, that doesn't make you necessarily a better athlete. And there are so many other ways. And I find that when athletes step out of their comfort zone, or they do a challenging course, or they change things up and it's unfamiliar, but then they conquer it, that's what they remember. And that gives the excitement, because we cannot control if you're going to have a PR on the day. We can't control what your watts are going to be or how you're going to feel. But there's got to be something more out of racing than just the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
What were you going to say, Elizabeth? You were going to say something there?
Oh, just kind of building on, you were talking about the athlete who kind of gets locked into their routine and doing the same thing, the same time. I find those athletes aren't as hardy. An obstacle pops up and it's a very dramatic thing, and they just don't develop that resilience and that ability to keep bouncing forward and moving forward. And like Marni just said, this is a really important life skill. So you always want to be looking for ways to grow, always changing that stimulus, finding, staying curious and looking for those new challenges. And that's how you will ultimately continue to thrive as an athlete. Maybe not get faster. I mean, at some point we don't always get faster. And I think that's okay. You might just become a better well-rounded triathlete, which is another thing I try to impart on people. Like, we're not trying to make you a fast swimmer, a fast biker, a fast runner. We're trying to make you the fastest triathlete you can be. And there's a lot to that, right? There's transitions, there's pacing, there's nutrition and hydration. So taking the numbers a little bit out of it.
Yeah, and I think the one thing too, and again, also interesting to note is Elizabeth has the surgery to show it, that she did something outside of her comfort zone. And you also put on a gravel triathlon too. Let's note that you do that there in Illinois. And then, people don't follow Marni. Marni's been getting a lot into mountain biking. And I think that's an interesting transition, because both of these two are kind of like venturing off and doing something else and creating a different stimulus, which I think is very important. And I also think that's really challenging for people, because they have their tri bike and they think, well, if I'm not doing my tri bike, I'm not a triathlete. But, to note, Marni was doing all this mountain biking before St. George, and yet you took 5th in your age group at a world championship, which is like, well, people wouldn't quite believe that. But I think that's an interesting thing of like, you can do things much differently and still get a really good result doing something different, instead of, I have to get in this 6-hour bike ride. And, it's like a refreshing reset to see, but still seeing results come out of it. And the same thing for Elizabeth doing like a gravel triathlon. Really, it's just interesting to see those two things kind of coming together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we all coach for endurance, and endurance, it doesn't look one particular way. I mean, once the event gets over 90 minutes, there might be subtle changes in the demands of the course, but it's all the same type of physiology that we're trying to improve and chase. And so I think it's great to get out there, think and move outside of the box of just swim, bike, run on your tri bike in the pool on the same route that you go with your running buddies. The gravel triathlon for me was just a way to be the example for my athletes and just say, hey guys, we can do new things, and we don't have to know that we're going to be great at them. I mean, I ride gravel all the time, but I do not ride chunky rocks, obviously. But still no regrets. I got out there. It was an awesome day, a great experience. I would absolutely do it again. And that's how you keep finding that next level in yourself as an athlete, mentally and physically, to I didn't know I could run that slow on a run course. I didn't, I was out there. It was so slow on that run course, but I thought, wow, this is just different. It really takes the pace out of it, and you're just focused on moving forward and keeping your eyes on the ground. And it was just mentally stimulating in a whole new way.
I did a lot of trail runs this past year, and because my husband just got into Xterra racing, and so they combine with trail runs. So I just got into trail runs, and I've never walked so much in my life. I'm like, usually I'm really good at mentally, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to do this and I'm going to run to here. And I'm like, nope, I will be walking. So you learn how to walk a lot. But one thing I want to mention about the expanding and stepping out of that comfort zone is, I think in some ways you can look at it, use my husband as an example, that he started getting the Xterra triathlon, and he's like, I don't want to do the road anymore. I'm so 100% Xterra and gravel biking and mountain biking. I love it. I'm just not interested in the triathlon anymore. And then I started getting into the mountain biking. But actually what I've realized is that it's not that we're stepping away from triathlon. These other events are actually keeping us in the sport of triathlon, because there's still so much good with swimming, biking, and running. I'm a lifelong swimmer. I'll always be swimming. But these sports now that we can do a gravel race or do a gravel triathlon or an Xterra race, we can incorporate that same joy, or we can have that joy, and then we can then use that excitement for what we felt during that event. And you're almost in some ways more motivated to get back into the road triathlon as well, or the swimming and the biking and the running, just from that one high that you received from doing something different. So I don't think that that we're moving away, that Elizabeth and I are saying, goodbye triathlon, we're not going to do you anymore. But we've done this sport for so long that in order for us to keep thriving and enjoying the swim, bike, run lifestyle, it's really important to find different avenues to still swim, bike, and run.
Yeah, and what a great example that success looks so many different ways. There is not one path to get to the top. I mean, sure, you can train 30 to 40 hours a week and just put everything else on your life on hold, but that's not really sustainable. And I think what Marni and I are showing is that there can be a sustainable way to do this at a really high level for a very long period of time, still get the same joy you got out of it back in 2006 today, even though it looks really different. You look really different. You're a different athlete, you know, but it doesn't, there is no single formula, which is, I'm sure, what you guys love about coaching. You can have, you know, 10 different athletes doing the same event, and there are 10 different ways to get to what their definition of success is.
You know, one thing, and just kind of some things I'm thinking about with this is with your guys' mountain biking and other stuff like that is, you know, one thing that I'm really starting to dabble into and get passionate about is actually cyclocross racing. You know, in Madison, we have like a really good series for cyclocross racing. And a couple of years ago, I dabbled in it. I was like more nervous for a cyclocross race than I was for any triathlon I've ever done, because it was so new. Everything about it was different. And when I finished it, I walked away thinking, I want to be really good at this, because it was so different, but so hard that there was like, I just started to love that. And then last year, I think I did 3 to 4 races. And then this year I would like to do even more. And I think about too, in terms of challenges, you know, so I was going to say Dirty Kansas, but it's called Unbound, you know, the 200-mile gravel race. You know, like I get inspired by watching events like that. I mean, I watch events like that and I think, you know, 10 to 12 plus hours of riding your bike. I mean, that's like a challenge that I look forward to try to do at some point. And I still love triathlon because I'm doing Ironman this year. But I think like on a challenge, on a very general sense, like I just like to have a challenge in a lot of different aspects. And then one thing I was thinking about too is like for the people who just do Ironman or just do 70.3, again, here in Madison, I feel very blessed because we also have a very big sprint triathlon series. We have like 5 or 6 triathlons of shorter distances. And I think the hardest thing for me to do with athletes is convince them, let's not go long this year. I want you to do like 6 to 7 sprint triathlons. I want you to race more. I want you to train less. And I want you just to have fun in going complete red line, because like there is a huge enjoyment to that where you don't think as much. I mean, literally it's a 400 swim, it's a 12-mile bike, it's a 5K. And once people actually start doing that, they find that, so I don't need to train. I can train 5 hours less. I can race more. It's cheaper. And I'm having so much fun. Like I'm done by 9 or I'm done by 10. I think there's so many different elements to all of this that I think is really interesting when people really go a different path with that. And both of you race short course. I mean, Elizabeth, last year you won your age group at USAT Nationals, you know, so there's a huge range there of all of that, which is important.
Yeah, I think, you know, I mean, there's long course racing is really great. You learn so much about yourself and it's such an adventure. And that first time you do your first Ironman, you just feel like a rock star, right? Everyone gives you all this attention and you just, every time you're out there training, it's a new thing that you've learned. But if you just keep doing that year after year and then wonder, well, why am I not getting faster? Or, you know, you gotta mix it up, and just nothing better than going out there and going fast. And maybe some people are just scared of that effort level or, you know, pushing themselves. But I often find that athletes, I just had one, she's, you know, chronic Ironman, and I made her do a sprint and she's like, wow, that was so fun. And, you know, of course she did well, and she hadn't run that fast in a long time. And that short course racing elevates you to a place that you really can't go in training by yourself, especially as you get older and more into the sport. You need other people around you and those external motivators to really push you.
There's something special about a beginner's mindset and the no expectations and the freedom and the all the things that you still have to learn. And that's exciting. And when you're in the sport for a long time, I still get nervous for the Ironman. It's still a very long day and a lot of things can go wrong. And there's a lot that has to happen to get to that finish line, but it has become familiar to me. And I know what to expect, and that helps me succeed. But I really enjoy the unfamiliarity of these other events that I'm partaking in, especially mountain biking, because I'm a complete beginner and I'm learning every time, and it's so much fun. I really enjoy that excitement of doing something for the first time.
So, Marni, do you have any funny stories from like some of your first mountain bike races? Like anything that like comes to mind, or because I mean you're new to it. I mean, but you live in an area where you definitely get to practice that. But I mean, I'm curious, like any stories or any kind of funny things that people might not be able to hear that happen from like a mountain bike race.
Well, the first race that I did, my chain broke in like the first few miles, and my husband, who works on our bikes, felt incredibly bad. I told him it wasn't his fault, but he felt like it was his fault. But I ran with my bike back, and like that was my first experience, was having a major mechanical in the first race. But I continued on. It was a 6-hour race, so I had plenty of time. But that was something, and I have fallen a lot. The obstacles that you have to get over are really hard for me, in that I'm learning how to shift my weight and to have different gear choices, and finding the right line. But also we spend a lot of time sectioning the courses. And so we have to go back, and I posted a video on Instagram yesterday where we were riding in DuPont yesterday, and there was one feature, and Corel told me that it was going to be really hard. So I just got off my bike and went over it. But that doesn't serve me very well. And so we went back, and I did it 6 times. And usually I think 3 times is good, but I was a little extra stubborn, and I was like, I'm going to get this. And it requires a little bit of falling and doing it, but eventually I got it. But I think those are the fun stories of just being able to conquer something that you didn't think that you could do.
Yeah. I mean, I think that presents like a whole different level of skill to like what you're doing, which is like a whole different, like, again, like I think about it, like that's a positive stress. And, like when I'm doing cyclocross racing, I'm going as hard as I can, and I'm probably one of the least technical riders out there. Like I have a good engine, but when we're going through like technical sections, I mean, I'm getting rocked. People I'm like, how can you go through a corner like that? And it just infuriates me that I can't do that, but all I want to do is practice it. And I think this is it's like one more thing that's always in my mind. Like I want to practice that element of it. Yeah.
Well, I think this is such a good point, because athletes have to keep in mind that training isn't the only way to become a better athlete. I know even for myself that improving with mountain biking and gravel biking has made me an even better triathlon biker. And I'm descending much better, especially in the wind, which is something that was really uncomfortable for me in the past. And so just taking time to improve your bike handling skills, that can make you a better athlete. And so we have to take the focus away from just the training, that if I train harder, I will become a better athlete. We had a handful of athletes at Blue Ridge. We did a skills camp here in Greenville. We have really technical terrain where we live. So we had a small handful of athletes do a skills camp, and they did Blue Ridge, and they had faster times on the course just because they were descending better. They were taking the turns better. They were more confident. They didn't feel as scared. So we have to think about those things, that as you progress and as you grow as an athlete, the answer is not just train harder and train longer. You have to start looking at other things that will help you stay healthy and be a better athlete.
Yep. So I want to talk about coaching. I want to like put our coaching hats on now. If you can imagine like a coaching hat. Okay, that was failed. But it's funny to me. So let's go with, so as coaches, I mean, and again, like, I want to talk about, I want people to hear about how a coach's evolution changes, because I think one thing is, I mean, both of you two, I would really consider you both to be thinkers, which I think as a coach is probably like one of the best qualities a coach can have. And I'm sure we've met coaches where they're not thinkers. They're just like, this is what I do because this is the book that I've read, so I have to stay true to this. Or whatever. And I'm curious to know, like, how has your coaching changed, or what are some things that you used to do that you can look back on and say, yep, I used to do that, but I don't quite do that anymore. So like Elizabeth, why don't you start with this? Is just like, how has your coaching changed throughout the years?
Yeah, so I think most coaches who go through a certification process, you think that coaching lives and dies by this annual training plan. And you have this like very complicated, colorful spreadsheet, and you plan everything out. And I used to do a lot of that behind the scenes. And it just gave me some sort of confidence in knowing that I wasn't just randomly doing things or there was an overarching plan. But what you realize is that athletes are living things and they change every week, day to day, and you can't be recreating an ATP every other week. And so while I used to plan out every single phase and all that, now I think all of us coaches, you know where an athlete needs to be. You know that there's a general preparation, there's a more specific preparation. You know what the demands of the course are, what this athlete's strengths and weaknesses are, and you can let things flow a little more. And I feel like when you let things flow a little more, you're more in tune with how is the athlete actually responding to the plan versus, well, it's week 3 of block number 4, and this is what we need to do. And so I don't know. And I know that sounds a little loosey-goosey, and I don't just randomly throw things out there, but I have just learned to let things flow a little more and be more in tune with where the athlete's at and just planning the training, not week to week, but just, making sure that it's not always to a plan.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that only takes experience to do that, because I think when we talk about just on a very basic level, how an athlete improves, like it just comes down to stress, right? Stress app, we get that. And I think the one thing that you have to be in tune with what your athlete is doing. So like, let's say you plan, like if we follow 3 weeks of building, 1 week of recovery, however you think of it, let's say you get to the end of the 3rd week and you haven't applied enough stimulus and you're like, yep, we're going to go easy. It's like, well, the athlete, I can keep going. And I think you need to be like being able to adapt. Like, okay, yeah, like let's keep going. Like let's keep adding a little bit of a stimulus to that. And yeah, Marni, what do you think?
I totally agree with all of that. And to piggyback on that, I think that some of the best coaches in the world, they keep the training really simple. And you need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. But doing testing all the time or doing lactate or measuring core body temperature, all these extra things, I think a lot of the newer coaches get really wrapped up into more of the science and the latest and greatest, as opposed to just thinking that or remembering that you are coaching a human being. And especially an athlete that's just getting into the sport, they're not efficient. They don't know how to read their body. They don't have years of knowing how to create that regimen or that routine. They may not have that, or they may have too much motivation and they don't know how to keep the easy sessions easy. So those are the things that you have to really make sure that you're communicating with the athlete and not looking for those marginal gains. Also with the coaching, you can't get years of experience from a coaching certificate or even a handful of CEUs. Your athletes are your case studies, and that's where you learn the most. And you actually learn when you make mistakes, as hard as it is for a coach, but you learn the most when things don't go well, and then you can work on them. And athletes can be in different groups. And so you can have a handful of athletes where okay, this should work for this athlete, this should work for these athletes. But you learn that from experience, from decades of experience. I think it helps for myself and Elizabeth, when you're an athlete yourself, because you can go through it, you can do some of these workouts, you can go through the same things that you're prescribing for your athletes, maybe even before you prescribe them, and see how those things might work. But you are going to learn the most when you have years and years of experience, and then learning from other coaches as well, what works and what doesn't work. And oftentimes it's great to learn from coaches that maybe your philosophies don't match up, and then you can take certain things away. So I think having a philosophy and what you believe in is important, so you don't just start pulling things from other coaches. But just because you believe in one way doesn't mean that you can't still learn or just think about what other coaches or other athletes are doing. And then I would say that over the years, what we have learned is for our athletes to take more ownership on race day and to teach them how to be better racers. We're really big on the racing aspect. And I think some athletes may think, oh, well, for those who win their age group or those who are on the podium, but we have athletes that are coming in the upper 6 hours for a half Ironman, or 12, 13 hours in a full distance, or even 14 hours. And we say the same things to them of, you race. This is how you're not just completing, you're competing, because we want them to have that athlete mindset and to take ownership of that, and to know what tools they need, and knowing that every race they're going to get more tools to add to their tool bag, and they'll be more experienced. And that is a big part of coaching. It's not just arriving with a certain amount of fitness, but knowing how to use that fitness on race day.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think about, like, how the thing that comes to me is, I think now I've slowed things down quite a bit with, like, athlete development. I think when I was first starting, like, as a coach, like, you're hungry and you want things to happen, so you start to force training, and you start to force maybe too much because you feel like this, like you want to prove yourself as a coach. And I think now, as I look at it, like, one thing that I know is, like, we do a lot less intensity. And by no means am I start to bring in polarization talking or anything like that. I think the biggest thing that I look at now is just slow things down, try to grow the athlete a little slower. And I think now when I look at sessions that we try to do, and if they're really key sessions, I try to look at that in terms of, how is the session going to be educational for the athlete to allow them to be successful on race day? And you try to present it in that aspect of it. And I think another part that I was thinking about is, we talked about this before, so I don't want to bring it up too much, is before I was I grew confidence from, like, how much did I know in terms of data, and now I really talk about it. And it's not like I don't care. I think it's more, we use data, but then on race day, we don't use it. And I think it's almost like I present less to give them more confidence, which seems so backwards, and it does make you feel lazy. But for the people who really adapt to that, they do the best. And I think that's how it's changed, as I tried to do everything, and now as a coach, I almost feel like I tried to do less to let them to be, like, really successful with it. Yeah,
it's about getting out of the athlete's way so they can do, like what Marni said. On race day, you shouldn't need your coach there telling you what to do. It should be automatic. You should have the confidence to do it, the know-how, the flexibility, and if you're just looking for that formula. And like you, Steve, I'm the same way. I feel like sometimes athletes want that specific, tell me the specific watts to hold or the specific pace. And you're like, it depends. And then you feel like you're not doing your job, but really you're doing the best job, because you're teaching them that you got to go inward. You got to read the course, understand how you're feeling, and make good decisions from that place.
Funny story I was going to say, I want to say this. So, funny story about Elizabeth is, I remember I was at Ironman Tulsa, oh my gosh, 2 years ago, or was it last year? I forget. And
last year.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I was talking with Elizabeth at one point, and she had somebody qualify there. And she said that one of, like, a parent or a spouse was there, and they just sent Elizabeth a video of an athlete. And Elizabeth responded to the person, she can run harder. And so this person then told the athlete, and then the person heard that, and then they're like, oh, I can run harder. And then they just qualified, which I find to be, like, the funniest story.
she was smiling way too much for being that deep into an Ironman. I'm like, if you're smiling that much, you've got an extra gear that we need to tap into.
Yeah, there's no smiling in triathlon.
Yeah.
We don't smile in triathlon. This is business.
You don't, no. And even if your coach isn't there, like your coach is still there. There's always eyes. You can always see what's going on. What about, kind of like, I don't know if you guys have ever read Adam Grant, his book, Think Again. Here's a question I have for you. What have you thought again about? What has made you think again? Like something that you used to do in coaching, now you've thought again about it, and you have a new way of doing things.
What have I thought again about with coaching? Like,
yeah.
Boy, oh boy.
Okay, here, I'll start.
Yes,
I have
please,
an example,
please do.
Right?
Thanks.
I will. So I used to never prescribe runs based off of miles. I'm like, why would you prescribe, like, just run an hour and whatever it is. But then I realized that there's some athletes, their psychology, they need to know the miles, and they just enjoy the run more when they are told the mileage to hit. Marathoners, if they come from a strong marathoning background, you better tell them miles, or else they're not going to buy into your plan as much. So I've really had to think again about that, and it will depend on who I prescribe runs to based on miles or time. So what about you, Steve?
Yeah, okay. Great example. Now I understand. Us men, we take a little longer to like process these things. So as we all know, I would say the last couple of years, I've actually gone more not to prescribing workouts and stuff off of heart rate, but I'm using heart rate a lot more in training as bigger indicators of how the workout went off of how I wanted it to go. So I would say for the longest time, heart rate is always like, yeah, it's not important. But now when I use it against pace or when I use it against power, I'm always looking at it. And I found that to be a very helpful cue to dictate, are we getting the stimulus or the response off the intensity that we're looking for? So I've gone old school with like, if people remember what heart rate monitors are, we're using them.
But it's not old school. That poor heart rate always gets the shaft. It's not old school. It is a direct look at what's going on inside of your body and how you're responding. So I'm saying bring back the heart rate.
Well, I'll keep with the running theme here, in that we have done two things specifically over the past year or two. Number one is for some of our athletes that can't tolerate a lot of running or pounding, athletes that just takes them a bit longer to complete certain mileage, that we put them on the elliptical, and to include the elliptical as part of their training. We found it to be a great way to still get the heart rate up. And they can also jump from the treadmill to the elliptical, and finding different ways to get a similar stimulus. And then also one thing that we've done recently, which we're not quite sure if it's working or not, I think we still need a few more test subjects. We had a few of our athletes go through it, is in training for the Ironman and the run marathon. Instead of, usually our runs are around 2 hours for our athletes, give or take, depending on how they are. But we do a lot of double run days or putting lots of workouts together. But one thing we tried, because one thing that I learned from Ironman, and then I did a 3-day extreme triathlon where I was running 18 miles, 13 miles day after day with the triathlon. And I was just, my feet were so tired. It was just like a lot of time on your feet. And so what we did was we had athletes complete 2 90-minute runs with an hour of walking between, but like power walking, and they could have their spouse join them or whatever. And they were pretty wrecked at the end of the run, but we found it to be a really safe way that they still got 3 hours of running. They got in almost 4 hours on their feet. I mean, some athletes, we had them do like a 75-minute run and then finish with a 90-minute run, but then do the hour in between. But just trying to come up with these different ways to create that stimulus where you're strengthening the body, but in a safe way.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So what about, Steve, I'm sorry, I'm taking over as host. I hope you don't mind, because I'm curious. I don't really talk to other coaches very often. I just sit here in my little corner office. What about, like, there was a sport that you never coached before, or you didn't even think you would like coaching, and then someone came to you and said, hey, I'm signed up for Ultraman or an Ultra this or that, and you learned a lot as a coach, or you actually found out you enjoyed it. Do you have an example of that?
I'm just upset that my podcast is being taken over. I'm not sure how to respond to that.
All good things change at some point, Steve.
Well, I think we're starting to get into, Corel and I have been talking about branching out and encouraging our athletes to do the different events, but then to also make sure that we teach them proper skills with the gravel biking and the mountain biking. We have actually taken clinics for mountain biking, even someone who as experienced as Corel. We want to learn and make sure we don't create bad habits. But I do think that I wouldn't call us Xterra triathlon coaches, but just in a way where I would like to provide our athletes with a safe track into these other sports. And so giving them the skills that will allow them to enter safely.
Yeah.
The first thing that came to mind, so my daughter is going to turn 5 in August, and I think it's important for her to specialize 100%, if she wants to be an Olympian by the age of 18 or something. So I feel
push her right into it. Just tiger parent her right into it.
So you asked the question in terms of a sport that I'm going to coach. I mean, I'm going to become the greatest soccer coach in the world to make sure that day and night she'll sleep with the soccer ball. She'll wake up using her left foot. All these things. It's kind of like on my mind, but it's totally joking, obviously. But I would say one thing that I really enjoy coaching, and I have a couple athletes that are just pure cyclists, and they do all of that, and it does kind of keep me like in the cycling roots because I enjoy cycling and I follow all of that. But I really enjoy the pure aspect of cycling. So when Marni talks about mountain biking, all I think about is, well, that physiology training is like a little bit different, or there's a different stimulus, and how do you train that athlete, and even like race dynamics and learning that and everything. And I find a lot of joy in coaching my pure cyclists because it is very different. But when you look at it in the lens of what's the demand of the event, what are they going to be going through? It's very easy, but it's very difficult. Well, it was difficult, but now it's a lot of fun to kind of talk through that. Yeah. What about you?
Ultra runners. I don't understand it. I don't know why you would want to run more than 75 minutes, although I know people do and I make people. But you have someone who comes to you and says, I want to do a 50 miler. And I've had people do 100 milers. And I just love it because it's, one of my favorite parts of coaching is the creative side, is figuring out each athlete's puzzle and all the different ways to get to the same end point. And the ultra running is such a unique challenge. I mean, it's a lot of time in their feet, but you can't have them out there running. Most people are not durable to run that much. So you have them doing incline walking or step mill at the gym or really long hikes or back-to-back long runs or multi-runs throughout the day. And I just love it. It's just so different. And they seem to like it too. And maybe it's because it's not just, go run a bunch of miles. So that's one thing over the years I've really grown to enjoy.
Yeah, I told myself after Ironman Wisconsin this year is that I wanted to do an ultra. I just wanted to do an ultra run. And, kind of east of us, there's some good areas. And I said, I'm going to do a 50 miler. I'm just going to do a 50 miler. I had no idea what 50 miles of running even meant. And then I looked at the results. It was like 12 to 13 hours. And I said, yeah, I'm never going to do a 50 mile run. Like, I can't do that. I'm set up. And Cindy was like, why don't you just do a 50K? I'm like, yeah. That sounds good to me, which I don't know if that's like ultra. It is, but yeah. And I would say I coached a couple people that was really challenging. Nobody's has done Norseman, but they've done one in Alaska and they did one in Canada, and both of those really challenged me too because the logistics, the training, everything was very, very different for that. It was pretty fun.
Elizabeth, when you mentioned all those right before you started your wheels turning of all those things you would have them do for the ultra marathon, I was thinking of those exact same things, and I would have them doing the same things, even a lot of like running or doing a long run and then finishing with a hike. But I think kind of in thinking about the conversation that we had, a lot of that just comes with experience. And I think an older version of myself, when I just started coaching and maybe ultra running, I didn't know so much about it. It may like, okay, you're going to have to run 20 miles and then you're going to run 25 miles and then you're going to run 30 miles. And that was like an old frame of mind for coaching. And now we've got all these different creative ways that you can have your athlete do it in a safe way, get that stress, practice nutrition, work on the mental skills, do everything that you need to do, but in a way where you're not having to just do the mileage. And I think that's something that we're seeing with the sport, especially with a lot more of the veteran coaches, as well as coaches that have just been in the industry for a few years, but have that creative thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just one thing I think about is when I think about how I've changed is I've become less rigid with having the perfect progression, because I mean, I've had people that just run 15 miles a week and they continue to get better for a full year. And yet we haven't like changed one of the stimuluses in like the long run. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's not like that important, but it is important. But I don't get too upset about, or I don't scream at an athlete on a Monday of like, you didn't get 4 hours and 30 minutes and you got 4:15. You've totally wrecked the progression. And now your Ironman's finished. I mean, it doesn't happen like that. And I think once you become more flexible with the progression, it's just more enjoyable with that. So I think in closing is, you know, if you could say like one thing to the millions of triathletes listening to this podcast, I mean, what would be your take home message from Marni's laughing? You don't think I have a million listeners to this thing? It's the...
Well, I'm surprised it was only a million. I thought you were going to list everybody.
Yeah, I mean, all jokes.
Steven.
Kids. But yeah, I mean, like, what do you think is a take home message if you're an athlete listening to this? Because I think people would be very surprised. I mean, you have 3 veteran coaches or 2.5 veteran coaches on this. And I think it's very, very interesting that people might be hearing different sides. And I think that's the beauty of bringing 3 coaches on here and just hearing different sides of the story. So like, again, like what do you think would be like a good take home message for somebody listening?
I think, you know, if I could tell athletes one thing, it is that you are your own experiment. You are your own journey. It doesn't, just because all your friends on social media are doing this doesn't mean that's the only way to get where you want to go. And I think the more that you can focus on what works for you, what you enjoy, what's actually getting you better, then you just become more confident and you perform better and you achieve, you know, more of that flow state when you're out there versus thinking, well, an Ironman progression has to look like this. A marathon progression means I'm doing 3 20-mile runs. And we all know as coaches that no, there is no formula, because if there was a formula, we wouldn't need to race. We would just plug our numbers and everything into a little calculator and then just rank ourselves that way. So just find the joy and stay curious about the process of figuring out what actually works for you and be open to changing that along the way and staying flexible.
I love that we're finishing this conversation and not giving any more training tips, but just talking about the sport itself and how it can be so valuable in our life, because we all got into the sport because we didn't know what the outcome was going to be, but we saw it as a challenge. And then we stayed in it and did the next race because it was fun or we wanted to get better. And I think it's very important to make sure that triathlon doesn't define who you are. It's not your self-identity. You're so much more than being a triathlete or a runner or however you identify yourself. And this idea of performance-based athletic identity, it can be really tough on athletes and it can make them go down unhealthy routes. It can also cause burnout really quickly in the sport. To think that your self-identity is derived from what you can achieve in the sport is just a wrong way to be going through life. And we're all competitive. We're all passionate about the sport, but we don't need to associate our identity to the sport or our body image or how we look. And we've seen athletes that they do go down that route, and that self-worth is measured by how you look and how you perform, or what did you achieve on this day, or your weekly mileage, or these things that athletes are trying to control. You should not have to sacrifice important things in your life or your health, or change your beliefs or your strategies, all to, become a better you at the next race. So really important to separate your performance from who you are as a human, and what you do doesn't equal, or who you are doesn't equal what you do.
Yeah, my closing comments goes back to the desire to specialize. My daughter at 5 at soccer, and I think that what I think about is you have to enjoy the process in what you're doing, no matter what that might be or however you might get there. And I think that speaks to every athlete. Like I know one of Elizabeth's athletes, Kathy, tremendous athlete. I see her out doing everything in the world, skiing to mountain biking to this, to that. And I think that one of the best athletes in the world can do that while still be successful. And I think if you're not enjoying your process, or if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you should change that outlook, or you should change that process and ask yourself, what part am I not enjoying? And that could be, like you said, body composition. Like if you're never happy with yourself all day, maybe you need to change your outlook on how you're fueling your body. Or if you're not enjoying the season, maybe you're not enjoying the racing that you're doing, but I think a lot of it is we're doing this for fun. And I think you have to keep that enjoyment at an all-time high, even at a competitive level, because some of the athletes in the sport at the top of the end of it, they've been doing it a long time. And I can guarantee they really enjoy it. They really enjoy what they do. And I think that's really important at any level. Enjoy what you're doing. So
when the day after Ironman St. George, we have a lap pool in our complex we were staying, and Daniela Reef was there swimming, and I was fangirling, and can I get a picture when you're done? And so I was talking to her afterwards, and I was like, I'm just so happy that you came back to the sport, and it was so awesome what she did. And she said to me that the wins are great, but I really enjoy the process, and that's what makes her happy. I'm sure that winning feels great, but the reason why she still is in the sport and why she wanted to come back, from what I heard from her, was that she just loves the journey that she gets to go on.
Yeah. I think athletes like that, and you two are representations of that as well, is when you've accomplished so much in the sport, but you continue to do it, that speaks volumes of your personal approach and your personal mindset, because because Daniela, she's won the $1 million purse. She's won like 10 world championships, but yet she continues to do it. Yeah. So the internal drive is pretty fantastic. So, lastly, so where can athletes find you? Elizabeth is on one of the world's biggest podcasts, Another Mother Runner, right?
Yes. I'm
but where else can people find you?
So my business is Multisport Mastery. It's also on Instagram, plus JHC. So combined with JHC coaching, we're there. We have a great book on Facebook that anyone can join. And I'm also out on the race course. You see me out there.
Elizabeth's Instagram post, she dominates Instagram with some of the videos that she makes. So if you're looking,
the reels.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
It's all about the ring light, Steve, and the filter.
So this is me. So like Elizabeth saying she's not technology, but here she is just spewing the Instagram terms. And I have no idea what this means.
I know my technology. I just don't like to obsess about it. Marni, where can we find you, Marni?
TryMarniCoach.com, and then on Facebook and Instagram, Try Marni.
Awesome.
And I also have a blog. I'm still blogging.
Marni's still blogging, huh?
After all these years, I started in 2008, still blogging. It's a great way for me to get out my thoughts. So trymarni.blogspot.com.
Marni, I have athletes who send me blog posts that you post out. And part of me is like, I have athletes sending me other coaches' stuff about things. And I'm like, okay. But then, of course, it's good stuff, so I have to love it. But
yeah,
okay.
if it's a good coach. Yeah.
Okay, so we're done, and this has been a fantastic chat. So I really appreciate you guys hanging there with me and talking. It was a great chat.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.